Welcome to Philanthropic Conversations, a new podcast series from Carleton University's Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership Program. On this podcast, we dive into the evolving world of Canadian philanthropy and nonprofit leadership. We talk about real challenges, opportunities, and strategies shaping the sector.
Bonjour everyone, welcome to the podcast. I am Daniel Lanting, and over the next few months, you'll see several co-hosts just like me in the chair to help Megan steer the show. So this season, our rotating team also includes MPNL student Emily Goodwin and Fengwei Yu, who you'll meet in subsequent episodes. All right, Megan, are you ready?
Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. Our guest is Blake Goldring, a respected Canadian business leader and philanthropist. As chairman and CEO of AGF Management, Blake transformed the company into a global powerhouse. Beyond business, he's made a lasting impact in philanthropy, especially supporting veterans and their families, healthcare, and higher education. He founded Canada Company, a charity bridging the gap between the corporate world and the military. His family's contributions to Sunnybrook Health Science Centre and the University of Toronto have been nothing short of transformative. Blake's extraordinary legacy has earned him prestigious honors like the Order of Canada, the Order of Ontario, and the Vimy Award. Blake, we are delighted to welcome you to the show. Welcome.
Megan, great to see you. Great to see you, Danielle, as well. Let me just start by saying I think what Carleton's done with this program on philanthropy and nonprofit leadership, this is really truly extraordinary because we really need that sort of level of expertise and greater insight into what is a really, really important area of our ecosystem. You think of our country and so much better thanks to the work that philanthropists do, but also the great charities that are out there that are doing the really hard slogging.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I know that Danielle and I are both very proud to be a part of the program, and it's leads to great conversations like this. So as I was reading your bio, it's a significant and very impressive bio to read. I was wondering if we could actually just rewind back, and I would love if we could reflect on the journey that has brought you here. I'm wondering if we could just start with any experiences that have shaped your passion for both business and philanthropy, because again, we know that you've made significant impacts in both.
Well, if I think to the people who I've looked at, most directly would be my grandfather, Dr. C.C. Goldring, who was an educator. In fact, my family side, my dad's side, they were all educators, principals, superintendents, teachers, it went the whole line. And back in a long time ago, he and a group of community leaders in Toronto created what was now evolved into United Way. Following from that, my father, of course, he's an entrepreneur and created AGF with another gentleman back in 1957. But he, of course, picked up the baton with United Way and continued donating there. Then in turn, so did I, because it's an organization which touches so many different people and needy groups and underserved individuals. So that's been sort of the most direct one. But, if I think a little more broadly and what I've learned more recently, in the last decade and a half, it's really admiring some families like the Demery family, who were sponsors of the IG private podcast that we've got, the work they've done, the Westons, another one, Peter Monk. And I know that, Megan, you're right next to the Goldring Center for High Performance Sport, which is one of the sort of signature gifts that we gave to the University of Toronto. But, what is remarkable about that group is that they did major impact. These are very disciplined donors that give impact. And that certainly helped my thoughts. And then if I really want to go and be very extreme, and we don't need to go there, but my grade 11 French teacher who refused to allow me to draw French. She made a deal with me. And anyhow, I upheld my part of the bargain and she upheld hers. And that was life transformative for me.
That was lovely. Thank you so much for sharing those stories that connect to people, right? And that's really what it all comes back to in so many ways, from the families you talked about to, again, your grade 11 teacher. I love that. Danielle?
I find it very interesting when I see some people coming from the entrepreneur side and the business side and see how they take that and they bring it into the philanthropic world. So knowing all your background, everything you've done and you're still doing at AGF, I was wondering how it did and probably will influence the way you see philanthropic and thinking also about the large-scale philanthropic investment you're doing. So how did that impact the way you see it today and how you you
Well,
deal with that now.
Daniel, would it be helpful for your listeners if I give a little background on my personal journey and also for AGF, because it may not be known to everybody. So back in 1957, my father and another man created the firm. It was the first American fund offered to Canadian investors back then, which doesn't sound as exciting today, perhaps, but back then it was really quite a breakthrough. And he built the business. I remember on the 50th anniversary of AGF, when I was organizing a huge party, I asked my father, "Where are all the boxes of pictures of you guys drinking martinis and having cigars and having big get-togethers?" And he said, "What are you talking about? First 10 years, didn't know if we would even exist." Anyhow, since then, the company has evolved and we are a global asset management firm. We've managed over 50, and, we have 600 individuals. And the way you think about philanthropy when you have a publicly listed company and one that's tightly controlled by our family, you think about it a little differently. And it comes down to one word, and that's culture. You see, we've tried to really engender a great sense of belonging, inclusiveness, gender, and we have done that at AGF, really looking at our stakeholders. So, if you think about things like education, well, young people, junior achievement, helping them get financially literate. For women, big area of financial services. So we have Philanthropy, which is a group of women in capital markets, but they've just rebranded. Ivy Women in Asset Management, another major program of ours. We've got Inspire, really to help Indigenous individuals come into this type of business. Then for the environment, Trees for Life and Canada Company, of course, is a key cause of mine. And finally, of course, and the biggest program is United Way. But, when you talk about culture in a business like ours, we think about, again, making people think in the organization. Like everybody takes part in United Way. Remembrance Day service, everybody's told, and they do it willingly. And they look forward to our Remembrance Day service that we do through our organization. That's a slightly different nuance, if you will, from where we're making our major donations towards those areas of impact that are touching areas of our community and our stakeholders. If I look at personal, I mentioned that my grandfather was head of board of education. Like my father, went to public education, public school in Toronto. Went to University of Toronto. But by the way, Danielle, I took courses twice at Trois Pistoles, where I learned my French. And that was
Really?
thanks to Madame Safsel from grade 11. That was part of the deal. And God bless her, because from there, I was able to be admitted into INSEAD. Obviously, I had academics. I was the second youngest person. So it's a global number rated, top 5 global MBA schools. Hired in France to work for a Canadian bank. Unfortunately, the bank had lent a lot of money to Mexico, and this is the 1982 South American economic crisis. Mexico was the first to go. And anyhow, long story short, I ended up coming back to Toronto, which was horrible for me. The last thing I wanted to do was be here. And I worked for 5 years in the bank. My father got sick because he was working very hard building the business. So he had a triple bypass operation. And I honestly thought, if I don't go and join the business and understand what this business is all about, I mean, who knows? I might be a banker even to this day. God forbid. Not that there's any bankers taking this program. Anyhow, long story short, I did everything from investment management. Then I took a sales job in Quebec and the Maritimes, running that region. And then I went on to the operational side of the business. And as time went on, became president, then the CEO in 2000, and 2006 became chair of CEO. And then just in 2019, just right before COVID, talk about good timing, I passed the baton and became executive chair. So I'm involved in all the strategy and work very close with the CEO and making sure that we execute according to what the board wants to see done. But on a personal basis, I've often thought that really, people always talk about the money piece, but I'd say time and providing your expertise. And I've often thought that funding and donations and philanthropy, it's really like a 3 legs to a stool. And, that stool's not going to be very strong if you take away any one of them. So, that's something that I've always borne in mind. So how has it shaped me? Well, I've gone and made sure that if I get into something, I go all in. I go on the board. I want to make sure that I can contribute. Can't tell you the number of times, like right now in the CD Howe Institute, where I run the investment committee, but I've done that for many organizations over the years. But, through the experience, but then I feel it's my duty to contribute financially to what I get involved with. So that would be sort of, if you will, there's the corporate piece, which is more based on culture and dealing with our stakeholders. And then personal, it's really those things that really get me passionate.
So you really align time, treasure, and talent every time you get involved into something. That's incredible.
Yeah, what I'm really hearing from that is the description of like a holistic approach to, sounds like how you do everything, Blake, honestly. Like if you're all in, that is probably the way to see impact. So what I'm actually curious about, and I'd love to pull the thread on a little bit, is just thinking about also what this means for your legacy, whether again, it's something you're thinking in the short and long term. How do you talk about this when it comes to talking about the culture of philanthropy, obviously within your workspace, within the business, or within your family? I'm just curious about, how do you talk about that at the dinner table? And how does that, I just want to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, because I think that, we're talking about, again, a very like 360 way of thinking about generosity. So it's more than just financial contributions. This is generosity of time, you name it. But how do you talk about that with your circles of people?
It's a great question, Megan, because here on Bay Street, there are some people who are wildly wealthy and they are 100% focused on doing their business. And I respect that. It's not the way I want to operate because, it's not. And then, I always kind of bristle when I hear about, I want to give back. It's a simplistic way of saying, to kind of encapsulate, we all know what it means. But I don't really think it captures the true essence because, frankly, 53.5% tax raise, give back already. You get quite a bit, so that's not an issue. It's more, how can I contribute personally to help advance the cause, but also learn too. I want to be somebody who is learning and growing at the same time. I could go on, if you wish, to talk about some of those, but it is really kind of unique. And why not go and draw your own picture on how you want to have this turn out?
Maybe I will ask a follow-up then, if that's all right, because I am curious about the learning, because I think that's part of the excitement around engaging with causes you care about. Could you share a learning, whether it's more recent or something that, again, has maybe followed you over the years, a key learning that you'd love to share around giving it back and around that engagement with generosity?
Well, I've been involved in healthcare, education, the military, the arts, and what I like to do is make connections between them and through them. I'll give you one. When I was on the board I was invited by Norman Jewison to go onto the board at the Canadian Film Center, and there's a man who I loved, and I thought, what a great individual. And I thought, well, with what we're doing at the University of Toronto, why not create a program into the Vic One stream, which was really evolving at the time. And we created the Jewison stream, which to this day is one of the
Yes.
most positive. And, I went at a liberal arts undergraduate degree because I think it's a great way to really expand your thinking and then later on do your graduate and really nail down on those areas that you want to really focus on. And that was a huge success. When I was at the board at Sunnybrook, I remember board chair, I decided to step up in a significant way. But the deal was, and I wrote into my donor agreement, that I get to go into the operating rooms twice a year. And I have seen Dr. Asha Mallet, one of the top laparoscopic surgeons, do detailed cancer operations. Dr. Andrew Dewick do a huge open heart surgeries and cardiac replacements, stopping people's heart. Like, how wild is that? Homer Tien and Avery Nathan, these are top surgeons for trauma. Sunnybrook is the number one hospital for trauma in the country by far. And I've spent many nights, Friday nights, we look for a full moon on a end of month because unfortunately that's when people kind of act a little strange, but it's very active in the Bay, and the things you see there, and it's things I could never do, but I admire the expertise. And, to see somebody who's badly hurt come into the trauma bay, and you've got teams come. And the closest analogy to it, I don't know if you ever watch F1 racing or saw Drive to Survive, and you see the car come
Yes.
right rushing in, and then experts on changing tires and wiping windshields, they all come in,
Mhm.
and it's obviously doing something very different. It takes a little bit longer, but it's that is a close analogy to what I see in my TSO. I could go on. Like, I mean, Toronto Symphony Orchestra, I did a deal with them where over a long period of time, I get to sponsor concerts per year. But the deal is for the 4 concerts that I sponsor, I get the right to go and get out with the artist. I'm a frustrated pianist. I'm a failed pianist. I wanted to be a classical pianist. Something I'm really interested back in high school and before. So now, isn't that great when I get to go with Angela Hewitt, and I would take her up to the lieutenant governor's suite, and she would play, and we'd have lunch, and there'd be a small group of us. Uh, you know, uh, Manuel Axe, who's one of the greatest interpreters of Brahms, he wanted to go and see a basketball game, so we were at courtside together, and what a great guy. And he was just in Toronto just a few weeks ago, and I was able to see him when he was through. I mean, the list, Jan Lisicki. I said, well, why don't we go to a hockey game? And he had a great time. Getting to know these great artists, you see them on a stage with such discipline, such focus, and then to get out and meet them as people. But that's the joy, I think, of being active in philanthropy. So I was on the board of the TSO, on the board of CFC, the hospital. I could go on about military too, but I'm going to stop and just let you. I mean, do you not think that that's part of giving? Like to think rather than cut a check,
Oh
why
yeah.
not go and expand and say, okay, well, I don't want to put my name just sitting on a building or have a water fountain named after me. I want to do something where I get a benefit too.
Well, and also just to like connect with the humanity behind the giving, right? The excellence, like you talk about, again, you talked about a range of things there that are all remarkable and all connect to, different aspects of the human experience, whether you're helping folks who are, in a trauma situation to the excellence of, some of the greatest musicians in the world and at the TSO. And again, I think what it reminds me of and what I reflect on, and we've talked about this in our program, and I know Danielle and I engage with this in our work as well, is that, the reason why people give is so much more than just, like you say, to have a name on something or for a tax credit. It really is to connect with something that is meaningful and helps. And that goes way, way, way deeper than a simple cutting of a check, right? So yeah, I hear you. I think that comes alive in the stories you told. So
Totally get where higher education, is coming from, why you got involved. We get that. We get that for also art and culture and health as well. I was very curious about the military part, though, because I know you're really involved into this transition, going back to a civil life after, service. And I know you were very involved. You got the Order of Vimy, and I was curious, where is that coming from? And actually, why did you also pick that? Because at some point in philanthropy, sometimes we have to pick and choose which cause we will support. So I get from all the other one, this one I was also very curious to see where it came from, actually.
Well, you raise a really good point about picking and choosing, and I think we should come back to that. But sometimes you trip and you fall and you discover something really pretty extraordinary. And back at the end of the 90s, a friend of a friend who I didn't really know became the commanding officer of a reserve regiment in downtown Toronto. And I've always been a bit of a history buff. I've always loved history because we can learn so much, either through the arts, just our history, philosophy, how it's evolved, how education has evolved over the years, right? And so it's really an area that's meant a lot to me, and military history in particular. So I kind of thought it was a lark, and they took up a collection for this regiment, and a dozen of us put money in, and anyhow, this chap timed out, meaning he left and he went to the United Kingdom. So the next fellow came in and didn't really have an appreciation for a bunch of outsiders who had no military training, other than they may have gone to some movies, may have read some books. But at the end of 2 years, basically the group of 12 was down to one, and that was me. But I thought, well, I'm going to stick with this, go to the regimental dinners, and I'll be the odd person out. I kind of liked it, and I could do one night a year, and that would be fine. And then it was in 2003, I'll never forget, the elderly gentleman who was the honorary colonel. So that would be a key position in the regiment, which is the most senior. We have now it's King Charles is in the Royal Regiment of Canada, but who's our top leader, if you will. But he came to see me and said, listen, we'd like to have you become my replacement. And I said, excuse me? I mean, he was a career soldier, right? An elderly general. And I said, well, General, I mean, I've never marched. I've never fired a gun. I mean, I'm the wrong guy. I'm a Bay Street guy, finance person. And he said, wrong. We've lots of people who fire guns. We got lots of people who can march, but we don't have anybody from Bay Street. And we think we got to get outside of our own circle. And, I spent the next 4 weeks, every Thursday night when they have parade, they call it parading when they do their exercise. And I watched them. And this is just as Afghanistan was really ramping up and bodies were coming back. And I got thinking, well, wow, this is pretty serious stuff. And this might be my calling now. Maybe I should step up and do this. And if they think I can offer something, then we'll give it a go. And then lo and behold, in 2005, I actually was made the honorary colonel of this regiment. And it was late in a really bad afternoon in 2006. I got thinking, I can do much more than this. They're bringing back bodies, and we should go and get Bay Street to show our help, because people would come up and say, wow, I wish I could do something. But what are you going to do? You're not going to go to Afghanistan, right? So what are you going to do? And I thought, well, let's go and create a scholarship fund for the children of our fallen. But in order to do that, we should have a frame. And I thought, well, what's a bit of military? Well, a regimental brigade, you've got a company, you've got unit. So I said, well, what about Canada Company? And that's how I created an organization, but then thought many ways to serve, because the people I talked to they're not going to necessarily head off to Afghanistan and do fighting or join the military, but they want to help. And there are many ways to, so it's no more complicated than that, right? And I remember going then to a bunch of very wealthy people, Mr. Monk being one of them, Mr. Weston being another, Demery, Jim Basili, Tom Jenkins. There were a number of them. And everybody said yes. We raised $1 million. I called Rick Hillier. If you remember, Rick Hillier at the time was the head of our military. And I said, hey, we'd like to go and start this scholarship fund for the kids. And he said, oh, this is a brilliant idea. But there's a soldier on fund and you have to talk to this colonel. So I called the colonel. I said, oh, listen, we're raising money and we're going to do it. He said, well, we're not going to deal with you. You're going to just give us the money because we'll administer it. And I said, no, it doesn't work like that. Donors like to see exactly where their money goes. We're not going to put it into a blind trust where some goes here. So it was too much government thinking, right? Like, no, this is going to be a scholarship fund. And he said, absolutely no way. You won't get any support from the military. Well, I called Rick Hillier again. I said, hey, I've had this little exchange. How Rick said, are you joking? He said, this is one less demand on Soldier On Fund. You get 100% support from the military. So I called the colonel back and he said, what are you calling me back for again? This is not on. And he basically said, you're no support. And I said, well, you better talk to a fellow, maybe you've heard of him, General Rick Hillier. I think you were working in the same building, probably. Quiet. And I think he was putting pins in the doll with me afterward. He's no longer there, by the way. He was timed out, as he should have been. But that gave birth to a great organization. You know what's really cool? This is almost 20 years later. Next year, 20 years, right? From that time. And the alumni, these are children who've lost, in all cases, been a dad, killed, or be a PTSD death, or it's an accident caused in training, an F-18 crash or what have you. Uh, Anyhow, it's incredible because they've, on their own, came to us and said, we'd like to go and have an alumni group within Canada Company to be a peer group to help support others who are doing it, because we've seen how much support you gave us to give us the strength to go on and do some really great things. And we'd like to do the same for people who all of a sudden, really lost. So, I mean, it's that sort of thing that you can't put a price on that, right? Like that just blows me away. But we've done so many other things. We had a job transition program for military leaving to get jobs in the private sector, more than 3,600. We've got program education, back to the theme of education, teaching military history and the pride and the values of the Canadian military. This is on TVO right now in Ontario, and it's a program. So I've got a taping actually next week with Steve Paikin, and it's really to really engender this understanding of our nation, that it is built by all different people. Like we've got, the first Indigenous, sharpshooter. Fantastic. We've got the first Chinese Canadian soldiers. As they came in, they were initially told, you can't come in. But they said, no, we absolutely want to come in. And they were grudgingly adapted. And in the end, we're war heroes in World War I. So, I mean, there are stories of this type of nature that we bring life, just as you're doing, you're bringing life to something by talking about stories. And that's what we do at Canada Company.
Now, a word from our sponsor. We're excited to work with IG Private Wealth Management, a leader in helping Canadians achieve their financial goals. They are generously supporting the podcast, and we're excited to have them on board and look forward to bringing our listeners insights from their expert, Christine Van Cowenberg. IG has a long history of working with community and helping their clients with strategic philanthropy. To learn more, visit www.igprivatewealth.com. Now, back to the show. And it sounds like, again, I feel like we've talked about evolution a few times today as well. And it sounds like Canada Company continues to evolve just as needs either organically, are sort of discovered, whether that be like another type of, support that's necessary. You mentioned the support group that came out of that very organically. I love hearing a bit, again, how these sort of changes happen very naturally. What I'm curious about, because Canada Company is a success by all measures from what we understand, would you ever start another nonprofit, or would you rather go deeper with Canada Company? I'm just curious because, again, you've obviously learned a great deal and made this work. So what would you do next?
Well, I mean, to your point, there's a lot going on right now. So, I mean, it's an organic movement in a way. I mean, there are chapters that have sprung up with normal people in Halifax. We've got an active group there, active group in Calgary as well. That is really just taken root. And that's in addition to Quebec, Montreal, in Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver. So it's really expanding. So from a engagement perspective. So that takes a little more supervision and involvement. Our scholarship programs continues to evolve. We keep expanding that now to graduate students as well. Now have the alumni come on. That's fantastic. With the TVO initiative, another great program. In Quebec, by the way, it's had massive success. The program there is called Je me souviens. And I really suggest anybody to go and check it out, because it's been with school teachers. We work with school teachers as well as the pupils, make it very interactive. And, there's a desire among students to learn about this. There's maybe some muckamucks up in, the board eds across the country who say, or school boards that say, oh, there's no interest. Wrong. There's a massive interest among teachers to teach it, and also among school boards among the students, especially. So there's just a lot more, Megan. I think probably continuing on, and it kind of touches a bit on Danielle's observation about picking and choosing, right? And what I've chosen to do, and it's something we haven't talked about, and I love your perspective on this. And maybe they've covered it in some of your other meetings or discussions, and that is time that anybody should serve as a director. There just come to a point when they've done all they can do and contribute. And is there a time when somebody should move on. You see that in sports when somebody should maybe retire, or maybe politics, or other, there are other areas where there's a time for everybody. What do you think?
Well, we have discussed this definitely within our program, and it's certainly something that I think many of us encounter in the day-to-day work. Obviously, in many ways, it can depend because there can be, a great deal of energy 3 terms in for a director that remains unstoppable and continues to remain fresh. And then there are some times where a changing of the guard makes good sense for the organization, and a turnover can make sense at that point. So I do think that, making sure that the what is best for the organization itself is kept at the center, and that mission is what is centered when thinking about the engagement of directors' time, because ultimately that is likely what is bringing them to that work as well, right? And if they are no longer maybe bringing the same energy or the same output, one would hope that there could be a mutual understanding that we have to make choices for the organization that are going to continue to forward the good work that's happening. So, I think I've given you a very political answer in not answering, but I think that's because there's a lot of gray zone, right? We are in a country that has, thousands of nonprofits that benefit from the time of directors, and it can vary. Danielle, I wonder if you have anything to share.
Your answer was so much perfect, so I don't know what else I can add, but
That's kind.
yeah, it really. But yes, you're so right. I think that's so right. Is really it depends. There's a few boards I've stayed on for so many years, and at some point I was like, okay, what am I adding to the table now and today? Am I still, having this joy, this passion? Do I still see it as a privilege more than as a job, or am I always just thinking about what's best for the organization, or am I thinking sometimes what's best for me? Sometimes the balance is not always stable, and yes, I remember when I resigned of a few boards, at some point I was like, no, I don't see it anymore as a privilege. I see it more as a job that doesn't pay that much, and the passion wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel I was the right person. I was like, I'm using a spot at the table that somebody else could take and could do probably a better job, bring more passion, maybe more money, more whatever. I'm like, this is a privilege I'm using right now, and this is not helping the organization at some point. So this is when I decide to step back from a board. Yeah, it really depends, I think, and but also very curious about hearing you now that you know what we're thinking.
But if I could just add one other thing, I bristle and have bristled over the years when those individuals join a board and never show up at a meeting,
Yes,
and they use it for,
agreed.
I don't know, building a resume, padding a resume, or they think it's going to be making contacts for business, and they may or may not have success in that, and then the interest level drops away immediately. Those are the ones that I think are dangerous, and
Yes.
admittedly, sometimes you want to have these emeritus positions where, you maybe get a former, major leader or what have you. And that makes perfect sense. And there's an understanding, I think everybody knows, that as long as the person, they're there and they understand what the cause that they've signed up for. But it comes back to this issue about too many, right? And there's a fellow, Jeremy Black, who is the most prolific living military historian and just historian generally in the United Kingdom. Jeremy's written more than 250 books, Jeremy Black. And I had the pleasure to see him for his birthday last November. And I asked him a question. I said, you've studied the art of war and peace for, covering the history of humanity. So we'll go back 2 millennia. So you must have like 3 or 4 philosophic points. And he said, no, Blake, I'm not going to give you any points. And I was really disappointed when he said that. I thought, well, he said, well, I'll share one observation. And he said, when you're 30 years old, making it to 60, you don't even think about it. When you're, say, 60, making it to 75 or 80, making it to 90, I said, so what are you saying? And he said, well, make your time count, be with those things that you enjoy. And he had just turned 70, so he's just, older, but it resonated with me. And, I sent a few letters resigning after that to different boards, because exactly what you said, Danielle, if you're really not engaged and you're not really excited by it, or you think you've already contributed enough. One board being 20 years. Well, that's too long, right? Time to bring in the new blood to new way of thinking of things. Doesn't mean my passion is any less or support wise. It's just that the three legs of the stool, that one leg is just not working for me anymore. And I think if people can sort of think about that, start with, an early career, start with the, time, because you've got a little bit more time before the kids come and all that stuff and other obligations. And then, build into the experience as you grow in your work. And then you can offer that. And then if able at a certain stage, later point, give a little money or as it happens, maybe a little bit more, depending. But to me, it's a lovely way to be sort of think about the cycle.
Mm.
That's how I've kind of always considered it.
That's perfect. That actually leads to our next question. That again, I'm thinking about how to frame this, because what you've given us, or inadvertently given our listeners, is a little bit of a roadmap to think about how they can make an impact, how they can think about their time. And I love again, talking about the three-legged stool when it comes to where to put your time and your energy. I'm wondering if we could be a little bit more specific, though, and if you have any advice that you could offer our listeners, young professionals, maybe students of our program, when it comes to integrating philanthropy into their lives, not only to, again, enrich their day-to-day, but thinking about it from a Canadian perspective and thinking about it from enriching, the space that we all cohabitate. So I know we're going kind of broad there, but it's small and it's large at the same time. So I'm wondering if you could, again, share what you would recommend they think about.
Well, I mean, I said right at the start, go all in. Find one or two areas that um, you get passionate about and that you want to follow up and jump right in and start like that. Get on boards. I did that my first, when I gave my story when I was at the bank, I started to get on some boards right back then. And, they're small little organizations, but, it's from the learnings you get from that you ultimately are able to become board chairs of big hospitals, or in my case, honorary colonel for the Canadian Army, right? And you only achieve that, I think, after you've had those embarrassing moments where you forget what you're going to say, or your notes fall apart, or whatever. But you grow and learn, and then I think people who are passionate will be found out, and you'll often find it. Just like the story about me, Daniel's question about the military. It was not something I set out to do when I started work. It was probably the farthest from my mind, to be honest. But that's life, right?
Mhm.
We ask each guest to leave a question for our next guest, actually. So there was a previous guest that was with us. That was Lindsay Sherman Zekulin, the co-founder of Happy Roots Foundation in Ottawa. And her question was, if you could have a redo in your philanthropic work, what would it be, and why, and what did you learn from your current work that has moved your thinking? So I think we covered a couple of pieces there, but I'll leave you to it.
I can be very quick on that. I wish I'd learned to say no earlier, because it comes back to your point, or Daniel, that there are so many opportunities out there. And at one point I was chair of the Symphony, honorary colonel of the Army, board member of C.D. Howe Institute, board of CFC, as well as running a very large business and with a family and three great daughters. And anyhow, I think, it was just very, very much that way. Things that would change my way of donating and contributing. Well, the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate and this tax approach previous government was going to put in, and then now apparently walked back. But that was a horrific idea, really impacting charities across this country. And I was surprised that more charities didn't rise up. And obviously the hospital, Sunnybrook, I got them very active as well. U of T was huge. I'm sure Carleton was massive in this. I mean, it was just the most short-sighted view that a small little bubble of people in Ottawa came up with a really, really bad idea, and even increasing the amount of money that pensions foundations need to pay out, and depleting their source, and certainly in markets that you're getting today. I mean, those are just bad financial decisions made by Department of Finance and certain politicians. We can't let that happen again, in my view.
Well said. So we've talked a lot about legacy today. So as a final question, Blake, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind posing a question to our next guest, who I'll admit is a mystery guest right now, but is someone who's obviously in the philanthropic space. So if you could ask again, maybe someone like yourself or someone else who, again, gives back both financially and in other ways with their time and talent, what question would you ask them?
Well, we talked a lot about this three-legged stool today, and I would like to ask the next individual of the three, firstly, do you agree that there are the three legs, and maybe there's a fourth that we haven't talked about? And with the three legs, is there one that is stronger than the other, or are they all equal? And where does that individual see them firmly placed?
That is
Is
a
that a
great
good
question.
question?
That's a great question, actually. I can't wait to ask it, and I'm sure we're going to get a really rich answer out of that. But like Danielle said, we could probably chat with you all day, Blake. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and being so generous. We really appreciate it. It's been an absolute privilege to get to spend about an hour with you. So thank you very much for all you do and for spending some time with us and our listeners.
Well, Megan and Danielle, thank you both for being excellent interviewers. I've had a lot of fun, and I hope your listeners also gleaned one or two interesting points and action issues
No
as
doubt.
a result of our conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too.